Hey everybody, it is Dungeon Master Mark. Today starts our official session number 1 or video 1 of Ask a GM Your Question. So for today's video topic, I had a pretty interesting video on Facebook, and we started like a little chat, and someone asked how I like to create encounters, sometimes using weaker characters that can be more challenging to higher level parties, or basically ways to take an encounter and make it more challenging without adding more monsters, or without adding, like, giving, say, like goblins like +2 swords and stuff like that. In other words, ways to tweak your encounters to make them a little more challenging. That way, if you need to, you can kind of back off when it comes to tactics and things like that. So bear with me 1 second. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip the camera to the downward position so I can show you a little terrain set up. And for the purpose of this video, we're going to act like the party has stumbled across like a little encounter of goblins within a dungeon. So give me 1 second. Let me set the camera back up in a different view, and we'll go to that view. All right, bear with me 1 second. All right, everybody, it's Dungeon Master Mark back again. So we're just going to call this the overhead, or the GM view. So just imagine we are sitting at the table, we're running a game. So in this scenario, these 3 heroes, we have like a monk, like a magus, or some type of sorcerer, and we'll just say a fighter. And they're basically chasing, we'll say it's a long hallway, and of course the goblins, 3 of the goblins round a corner, and it looks like they start, making their way behind these barrels, like they're going to fight from behind these barrels. It's not really the most tactical combat, right? But there's a lot of things when this combat starts the party probably isn't thinking about. So the number 1 thing you can do, whether you're in combat or out of combat, especially though if you're in combat, is you can still have your players roll a perception check. The players might not realize, because they're running certain things, I would probably give them a slight negative. There's one chamber up here, it looks like there's a ramp. So what could happen, the goblin's going to have a lever. As soon as someone steps out, this little boulder comes crashing down, and basically you do kind of like an attack roll. And if it hits, of course, it hits, the player that stepped onto the square. This is especially good tactic if you're using kobolds, goblins, even really like hobgoblins, half-orcs, things that are intelligent enough, obviously, to use some basic tactics, especially if they've been living in this environment for a while. One of the other things I like to do, especially if you have, say, a room where you have a couple archers, say, behind a portcullis, right? Now, if you're on this side of the portcullis, obviously you can sit there, you can push your crossbows right up against the portcullis and just keep shooting through. Now, granted, the party may have some ranged weapons or missile weapons, but if they were expecting melee combat, they may have harnessed those, or they may not have them out. So it may take them a round, to drop their weapons, like their melee weapons, and then pull out their ranged weapons. And then also the people that are behind this are going to get slight cover. Of course, they're also going to take a penalty from that little bit of cover when they're firing through there also. But it basically negates the fact of whoever's behind that does not have to go in immediately to melee with the people on that side. Pardon me. Another thing you can consider in an encounter like this is, say there's a lever down here. They pull the lever, the portcullis opens, and then one of my favorite creatures is what's called a goblin hound, or some people call them troll hounds. In Pathfinder, they're a medium-sized, kind of like a goblin hybrid wolfhound, if you will. So they do have slight regenerative properties. So you could easily have where, they know there's 1 or 2 of these in there. The party rushes by, and, they might even see that the creature's in there, but, they're so absorbed with chasing after the enemy that they don't realize what's about to happen. So that's another way. And then what happens is, especially if there's 2 of those creatures, you could have 2 of them right behind the party, and then down here they're basically shooting melee, so that the party is forced to engage in melee with this encounter, while these guys down here are just shooting ranged weapons. So that's a really, really kind of a bait and switch tactic. It's very easy to use. Another thing you can do, I'm not sure if most people probably won't be able to see it from that angle, so I have some arrow slit little pieces here. So in this case, this piece is actually backwards, but say if the party was coming from this direction, and you have, a couple arrow slits here, the goblins would easily be able to sit through there and fire arrows at the heroes. And if they put a portcullis down here, it makes it a little bit more lethal because, of course, the party's going to get around the corner, realize they're basically shooting ducks, and so for 2 or 3 rounds, you have an opportunity just to sit there and take pop shots at the party. A very, very good tactic to use. That's one I like to use with kobolds and hobgoblins, especially since hobgoblins tend to be very tactical. They tend to build more defensive structures, things of that nature. So that's, 3 big things you can do. Another thing you can do is implement different types of traps, not just something simple like this. I mean, you could easily have where, there's tripwires where, the party, if they fail the perception check, may not see where all the goblins duck under a particular wire or jump over the wire. This works even best if you do it right around a corner. So obviously the goblins come around the corner. As soon as they get here, they jump over the little cord. The party doesn't see them jump over the cord, so I would give them, pretty much no benefit of a perception bonus or anything like that. They come around the corner, they don't, they drop trigger the trap, and then boom. Now, advantage like this is going to do 2 things. One, it's going to be very hard for the party to get past that. They might be able to use some magic, or maybe all the party has to spend a couple rounds chipping through this large stone block or trying to move it, just enough where they can squeeze through. But it also does one other thing. It gives the goblins the time to buff, if you will, if they have any spellcasters. Gives them a little bit of time to heal themselves back up. And it kind of segues into my second part. I don't like giving enemy creatures lots of magic items unless it's something that I know that I want to introduce into my party. So one thing I do have a bunch of are these spell tokens. And these just represent like a potion of invisibility, or like a potion of cure light wounds. So what I'll do is, I'll have like, that guy maybe has this. This guy has that, and when I put him out, I'll just write number 1, number 2, number 3. So I know each one of them has a potion. So in that case, if they've fallen back and that one's took a lot of damage, he's going to go ahead and he's going to drink his potion of healing. Now, since he's a small creature anyway, he might duck behind that barrel. The party doesn't even notice that he's drank his potion of healing. As far as they're concerned, he's maybe a 2-hit die goblin. He's took 6 points of damage. Little do they know he's just healed 6 points of damage back up. But it's a good way to kind of throw them off of how many hit points of damage they've done to a creature. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then the number 1 tip I would give for trying to control tactics and maybe the flow of the combat, and it's probably the easiest thing, is doors. And yes, I know that sounds extremely simple. You can easily make very, very complicated doors, like if there's some metal doors, if there's barred doors, portcullises. So there's a couple things you can do. You can have where it requires a key to certain areas. If all the goblins run around the corner, they get through this, they shut the door, and boom, they put a bar across the back. All of a sudden, it goes from like a DC 10 to burst through that door to like a DC 20. So it's very, very easy, especially if you take into consideration like a metal or a steel door. If they come through there and they drop a beam on it, or a beam across the back of it, all of a sudden it's extremely hard for the party to get through there. So that's one of those things you always definitely be cognitive of. Whether you use 3D terrain or not, or even if you use a dry erase map, if you have crates and things like that, obviously that's an easy way to implement cover, hard corners, things of this nature. So you can definitely give the creatures a bonus if they are smart enough to realize how to use those in combat. So it's definitely something to be cognitive of and kind of keep an eye out. That's one of the reasons I like to build my train setups beforehand. If you have an idea of which way the party is going to be coming from, definitely have a couple different ideas of depending on how that encounter starts, how the monsters are going to react. Goblins are one of those creatures, goblins, kobolds, they're fairly cowardly enough where they're going to take whatever advantage they can get. Another idea would be, if you're fighting something like a necromancer or a lich, obviously they're going to throw their skeletons and zombies directly at the party. They don't care if the skeletons get destroyed because they can just make more. So something like that, you definitely want to be aware that you're definitely going to be either swamping the party or you're going to be very, very tactical in your decisions. So definitely, if you can, if you're using, like a dry erase board or a map, try to draw everything ahead of time or, print it out ahead of time just so you have an idea of what's going to happen, and definitely have an idea of what your goal is for the enemy. Some enemies obviously are going to be retreating. Some are going to try to push forward, like in the goblins' case, they want the humans out. So they definitely want to push them out, but they have two options really. They can fall back and use tactical cover, or they can retreat. They're not strong enough to push the party out, using melee. As far as the other one, traps, you have ramp traps, you have like claw traps, kind of like bear claw traps. A good one to stick around corners. So if the party, chases after a goblin, the goblin knows where that's at. He's going to miss that square. There's a good chance that the party player, though, might step in that, and then they have their foot in a bear trap. You can have, things that are caused by levers, by trip wires. You can have, here's a little custom one I made where, it just basically breathes a cone of fire. So it basically uses like one bottle of alchemist fire. And then if you step on a pressure plate, it's going to shoot out kind of like a very, very weak dragon's breath or, burning hand spell. It's just going to shoot out like 15 foot of fire. So definitely be aware of different ways that you can use traps to make that easier. As when it comes to magic items, definitely quick, effective way by giving them potions of healing, invisibility, things of this nature, so they can get a slight advantage. I always have to warn people about, you definitely don't want to just give goblins, +2 swords and things like that, because it's definitely going to be a negative in the long run, because there's a good chance the party's going to kill them anyway. If they've already used up their potions, no big deal. But, a +2 sword, especially if there's a few of them, the party's going to wind up selling them later on, whatever ones they're not using. And then you kind of throw things out of balance a little bit. The final thing I want to bring up is spells. So grab this web over here. So in a combat like this, if you do have a spellcaster, or even if you use like alchemist items like Tanglefoot bags, things like that, there's definitely cheap items like Tanglefoot bags, sunrods, sunstones, thunderstones, things like that, where you can throw, a web spell. Now you don't have to throw that directly on the party. You can, if the party is still around the corner here, you can throw that in the middle so that the party, I don't want to say they're screwed, but first of all, you have, very hard terrain to get through, so the party might get stuck. You can also combine them together, so if the party goes through here, plus there's a trap, or maybe traps in this area, so you kind of double up on those, and that kind of gives you even more time for the goblins to get away, or kobolds, or whatever creature. You can make things like Tanglefoot bags, but they act kind of like a weakened black tentacles. I've made a couple of those in some different areas, or I should say different sessions or campaigns. And then the last thing I want to talk about, we kind of touched on earlier with the Trollhound, different monsters you can have the enemies use. If the enemies know that there's a mimic, maybe they've left it in a particular area because they know players or heroes occasionally come down here, they may know where that creature is. They might even throw a rope and kind of drag it into the center area. So as soon as they make their way off, the party's like, oh, well, at least we found this chest. Let's go ahead and grab it. As soon as they touch it, now they're stuck to this thing. Trollhounds, things like that, are more combat related, where you can find ways where you can use those as mooks, even though these are low level creatures. Sometimes the creature they might use as cannon fodder is even harder to beat than they are. So, like I said, hopefully this gives you a couple of different ideas of ways that you can kind of spice up your encounters, make things a little more challenging. The good thing is, something like this, if you do get to the point where the goblins definitely have the upper advantage, even though they're much weaker, you can still have them retreat because they're just trying to get away. You don't have to worry about potentially killing your party if you don't want to. So that's definitely something to be aware of. All right, folks. Well, thanks for watching today's video. If you guys have any other suggestions or questions, feel free to leave one, and I will try to get to it in the next video session we do. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.